So you spoke recently at the Press Club about the sharing economy. Do you want to explain a bit about what the sharing economy is and why should progressives be excited about it?
Well, sharing economy is different from what your mum told you when she asked you to share. It's the idea that we can directly link up customers and providers using the ubiquity of smartphones and the fast internet technology. Services such as Uber, Airbnb, Airtasker, Poorshake, just some of the sharing economy services. I think they have great potential for customers, but we need to make sure we also get the worker side right as well. I worry that we need to ensure with the sharing economy that we have an Australia that produces good jobs for all, not just services on demand for the most affluent.
And so there's been criticism of services like Uber that they're, from a workers' rights perspective, and I think in Victoria there's some argument they're technically illegal. How do we make sure that we get that balance right, that this isn't a way to reduce the ability for workers to coordinate and organise and collectively bargain?
Well, the starting point needs to be that many Australians are already using Uber. Within the first year of Uber being launched in Sydney, a tenth of all Sydney-siders had used it. But we also need to make sure that we get the balance right, and so there's good jobs there. I'm given heart somewhat by a study by Alan Kruger, President Obama's former economics advisor, which found that US Uber drivers earned more than US taxi drivers. At the moment, though, what I'm worried about is that Conservative governments are largely just putting their head in the sand rather than engaging with the sharing economy and making sure that a set of rules that were written 50 years ago are updated for the age of the smartphone.
So housing affordability is a key topic at the moment, and the Prime Minister thinks that it's good that housing prices are going up. From the perspective of inequality, what's the right policy settings around housing affordability? How do we get the balance right between getting an important asset for people but also access for people who don't have a house at the moment?
Housing's a challenge because it's both the largest stock of wealth for many Australian households but also a huge cost for many others. I was deeply troubled by the Prime Minister's answer on housing affordability because I think there's something really odious when your first response to a policy question is to think about your own wallet. But getting housing affordability right will involve boosting supply. Australia hasn't built as many houses as we've needed for the country with the fastest rate of population growth in the advanced world over the last decade. We also haven't built enough to keep up with the increasing numbers of 20-somethings who are moving out of home between living with their parents and starting their own family. So we need smart supply policies. We need a federal government that's willing to invest in urban public transport, not wash its hands of the issue. And we need a sensible, reasoned debate, not the sort of name-calling that we've gotten from the PM lately.
So some people are saying we need more of a European-style culture of renting and move away from the idea of the quarter-acre block and everyone having their own home. Is that a positive thing from a progressive point of view? Is that something we should be excited about, a shift to that kind of culture, or is that a way of avoiding the hard choices?
That's a fascinating question. I think in some sense it's showing up in the demand for the housing stock you're seeing already. Demand for apartments has been stronger than demand for new houses, certainly over the last couple of decades. It's reasonable to think that early on in your life you might be working out which job you're going to be in and changing careers a bit more, which might mean changing residential location a bit more in order to be close to the job. But for many Australians, owning your own home provides a measure of financial security. And in a world in which we need to worry not only about the inequality of earnings, but also the inequality of wealth, we need to make sure that people working as nurses, taxi drivers, teachers, have the opportunity to buy a home if they want to.
Just on inequality more broadly, the Conservative response to questions about inequality is, well, how much inequality is too much? How do we know? Where do we draw the line? You're an economist. Where do we draw the line? How do we know when we've got the right amount of inequality and not too much?
My former thesis advisor, Christopher Jenks, once started writing a book with the title, How Much Inequality Do We Want? And he said he gave up the project when he realised that he couldn't actually answer that question. But I think there is a sense among many Australians that the rapid rise in inequality over the last generation is straining against the egalitarian traditions. A nation where many of us sit in the front seat of taxis, we don't much like tipping, we don't have private areas and the beaches, we don't stand up when the Prime Minister enters the room. is a set of values increasingly adrift from a place where earnings have grown 3 times as fast for the top 10th as the bottom 10th, and where the wealthiest 3 Australians now have more wealth than the poorest 1 million Australians. So we need smart solutions on inequality, if for no other reason than that unequal countries tend to be countries with less social mobility, where the circumstances of your birth determine your life chances. No Member of Parliament, Labor or Conservative, wants to see us end up like that.
So you're the patron of the ACT branch of the Australian Fabians. The Fabians are the oldest progressive think tank in Australia. Do we still need think tanks like the Fabians? Now we have the internet and lots of pressure groups and different organisations and lots of options for people to get involved. Do we still need those sort of groups, and why are you involved in an organisation like the Fabians?
The Fabians are enormously important. They're founded in 1884, 7 years before the Great Australian Labor Party, and they're founded with the logo of a tortoise. Not many political movements would choose a tortoise as their icon, but it's important for the Fabians because it reminds us that smart progressive change is hard. If there were big magic bullet solutions to solve the world's problems, past generations would have done them already. So we need to go through that grindingly difficult work of crafting the political space and then getting the public momentum for important changes. National Disability Insurance Scheme is a great example of this, with Julia Gillard, Jenny Macklin, Bill Shorten spearheading a reform which ultimately was supported right across the Parliament. It's a good example of what a Fabian style of reform can bring about.
So it's great that we're talking about inequality in the public debate and housing affordability and lots of other important issues, but is there a pet issue of yours which you wish had more public attention than it gets right now?
I worry a lot about innovation, that Australia is a country which doesn't have as many new startup businesses as it should and isn't creating as many patents as it ought to be. There's standout examples. I spent time in Blue Chili, an incubator in Sydney. I was with Camplify, a startup in the sharing economy in Newcastle yesterday. But if you look at the overall statistics, it's very clear that countries without new businesses aren't going to be creating jobs in the decades to come. New businesses, according to the OECD, create 40% of all jobs. Small businesses over 10 years old are actually net job destroyers. So we've got to be creating those new jobs, the new ideas, and that's why Labor has to be not just the party that tackles inequality, but also the party that boosts innovation.